do you think actually goes to foreign aid? And the most common answer that is given is 25%. And when the follow-up question is asked, what percentage do you think it should be? The most common answer is 10%, which has a couple of interesting implications. One is it should be significantly reduced, but the other is the influence of the Bible and the concept of a tithe, that 90% is for us and 10% is to help the poor of the world. Well, perhaps you know that the actual number is about 1.5% of our federal budget goes to foreign aid. However, if you take out military aid and weapons, it actually comes down to about 0.6%. But I'm amazed, just truly amazed at how effectively that 0.6% can be used and is used in stunning ways to help those who are poor. So we rejoice, and I think we should rejoice at what has happened in our generation, in our current century. But there are still 3 billion people around the world, almost half of the world's population, 3 billion people who are living on $2 a day or less. We have about 1 million children who are sold every year, either as child soldiers or into the sex trade. And I hear these statistics. These are people for whom God has great compassion. And it must break the heart of God. Because Jesus came from heaven to earth to save sinners. And he started out with those who had the most basic of human needs. He loved the unlovable. He was famous for feeding those who were hungry. He sided with the oppressed. He embraced children, even when his followers said, not the children. And he said, yes, the children. So that's us. We're Christians. We're followers of Jesus. We're just like him, or at least we want to be just like him. A concern, a compassion, a commitment. What now? We help the poor. But Jesus, in some of his final words, gave his great commission in the end of the book of Matthew, to go and to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I have commanded. In other words, we're to evangelize. Okay, so if enormous progress has been made in our generation in terms of helping those who are extremely poor, how are we doing in terms of making disciples for Jesus Christ? Well, I would say that the two time periods with the most significant and profound change in this were the first century and now in the lives of those of us who are here this morning. Let me throw a few more stats your way. Let's go back a century. So in 1910, about 9% of the population of Africa was Christian, about 12 million people. 100 years later, in 2010, 48% of the population of Africa is Christian, just under 500 million people. And demographers and sociologists are predicting that within about a generation, the number of Christians in Africa will exceed 1 billion. And Africa will not only become the largest Christian continent in the world, it will become by far the largest Christian continent ever in all of history. Or take the People's Republic of China. Maybe you know, or maybe you remember that under Mao Zedong there was a cultural revolution where there was severe persecution of Christians. Some estimate that the number of Christians in this country of 1 billion plus people shrank down to maybe 1 million, or not many more than 1 million. That was hardly any. Do you know that today China is considered to be the 5th largest Christian nation in the world? And back to the demographers and the sociologists who are predicting the trend is within a generation or two, China is on its way to being the largest Christian nation in all of the world. But it's not just those kinds of statistics. It's a change, a sea change. Things are different. So, for example, Mark Knoll, the history professor at Notre Dame, says that there are 15,000 missionaries to Great Britain. Not from Great Britain, 15,000 missionaries to the United Kingdom, to Scotland and England and Wales and Northern Ireland, most of them from Africa and most of them from Asia. We've already talked today about what the BGAV has been doing in Ghana. Do you know there's a church in Ghana that is currently sending missionaries to 85 different countries in the world? I mean, it's different. It's God doing this amazing thing from everywhere to everywhere. So one morning, sitting at home alone in my chair, I was reading the New Testament book of Acts again, and read again Acts chapter 2, the story of Pentecost. And I know the story well, but I, in my imagination, wondered about other people at other times and places reading those same words, and how it might be a different experience for them than it would be for me. And I wondered what it was like for Christians in waves of persecution in the first century in the Roman Empire. I imagine that there were some who by candlelight late at night in some secret place would unravel a scroll and they would read the story of Pentecost. And they thrilled in this great miracle. 3,000 people, 3,000 became Christians in one day. People of different languages and from different places around the Mediterranean world. And somehow what God once did was giving them encouragement. And maybe they prayed and say, God, do it again. Just do it again. One more Pentecost. Could we just have 3,000 more? And as I was thinking about this, I remembered that I had just then recently, in the weeks before, read some statistics that claim that there are 32,000 new Christians every day in the People's Republic of China. 365 days of the year. 20,000 new believers every day in Africa south of the Sahara Desert. 10,000 new Christians every day in South America. And so I grabbed a piece of paper and a pencil and put down these numbers and some others from other parts of the world, totaled them up, and then divided the total by 24. And came up with a number in excess of 3,000. That is to say that we are living at a time when there is more than a Pentecost per hour. What was this apex miracle of the book of Acts, and Acts chapter 2, is now an occurrence every 60 minutes. There have been several Pentecosts since we first gathered at 8:30 this morning here in this room. It's stunning, it's amazing. And that led me to another, I guess, imaginary journey. You know, I've heard Christians, preachers who have said, when I get to heaven, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find those apostles. You know, the saints, Peter and Paul and Andrew and James and John. I'm going to go get in line. And when I get my turn, I'm going to ask them, what was it like? What was it like back then in the first century, at the beginning of the church? What was it like to be there at Pentecost when 3,000 in one day became believers? Until I realized that maybe my imagination was going the wrong direction. That it may be far more likely that someday in heaven, the saints, Peter and Andrew and James and John, they're going to be lined up to talk to you and to me. And they're going to say, what was it like? What was it like to be there at the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century when God was doing this great thing? What was it like? And what was your part? Nothing like this has ever happened before in human history. What people have prayed for 2,000 years. We're in the middle of it. This is our generation. But there are still 5 billion people who are not yet disciples of Jesus Christ. There are 2 billion, almost a third of the world's population, who have never once been invited to know Jesus Christ as Savior. 86% of all Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists in the world do not personally know one Christian. 86%. God cares deeply for those who are poor and who have not heard the good news of Jesus Christ. His compassion is great. and we share that compassion. That's what we do. We pray. We reach out. We reach out to immigrants who have come from around the world to the United States. Do you know there are 5 billion cell phones in the world? 5 billion. That means that virtually everybody can be called. There can be communication. And immigrants who have come to the United States are in direct contact and often frequent contact with their families and their friends back at home. They speak the language without accent. They know the culture perfectly. They know everyone by name. They often give financial support to those back from where they came from. And when we befriend them and when they become disciples of Jesus Christ, there is a means for making disciples in places that we would never otherwise be able to access. So we touch the lives of those who are poor, and we touch the heart of God. I don't know if you remember a news story. It's now 7 years ago, but it was the big deal. It was the top news story. It started on August 5th, 2010, when there was a cave-in at the San Jose copper and gold mine in the desert of Chile in South America. There were 33 miners who were trapped 2,300 feet underground, and there was no possible way that they could ever dig themselves out. In fact, it's been made into a movie. The name of the movie is The 33. For 69 days, camera crews and news people from around the globe came to South America, and they filmed people praying, hoping, drilling, engineers that came from the United States and other countries in what some consider to be a desperate attempt to save the lives of those who couldn't save themselves. And what is amazing is on October 13th of 2010, all 33 came to the surface. No one was lost. They rescued them all. It was fantastic. If you know the story or you remember that amazing news event, well, you probably don't remember the name of Manuel Gonzalez. I don't know why you would. He wasn't one of the 33. He wasn't trapped down in the ground. He didn't get rescued like the others. No, he was the one who got in the capsule 21 inches wide, and he went from the surface 2,300 feet down into the ground on the 12th of October. He went down at enormous risk to go where they were trapped and to help them out, one by one. On the 13th of October, all 33 were sent to the surface, and he was down there alone. And on the 14th of October, he rode out himself. That's the good news. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is the story of how sin caved in our world, and we were so deep down that there was no possible way that we could ever rescue ourselves or dig ourselves out. And it was then that the Son of God himself, at enormous risk, came from heaven to earth to rescue us. And now Jesus calls upon us. What now? To share his compassion for the poor, to share his call and his command to make disciples for Jesus Christ. Dear God, thank you for what you have done in our behalf. And now, thank you for the privileges that we have as the agents of Jesus Christ, your Son, to help the poor and to make disciples in our amazing generation. For Jesus' sake.